Hi. My name is Jacob Monk. Welcome to this lecture about the German disease. I want to tell you something about a very important European country named Germany and the political culture and mentality you will find in this country. Have you heard about the World War II and about Hitler? Still less people talk about this event. Today it is all about the Holocaust. I am sure you have heard a lot about the Holocaust, but do you know who was responsible for this event? If you say no, I will understand you, because most people don't. The Germans will assure you that they never heard about this event before the war was over, so they cannot be responsible. The former Pope Benedict XVI and all other Germans has one thing in common: they are all innocent. None of them did the killing at the East Front, none of them ran the concentration camps, and none of them wanted Hitler to be the leader of Germany. Needless to say, none of them did ever say anything against the Jews. The whole anti-Semitic campaign was only run by Hitler and a few of his generals. The common German man and woman did not have any engagement or any responsibility. That's what the Germans think of themselves today. They are lying, they are delusional, and they are deniers. Not Holocaust deniers, but racism deniers and Nazism deniers. My negative attitude to the German contemporary culture does not mean that I am blind to the greatness that Germany has created in the past. Some of the world's greatest composers, philosophers, and theologians are of German origin. I am also aware that the German culture is the core of the European culture, and thus also constitutes the exile culture that is the foundation of modern America. Germany has been the center of the two most significant showdowns with power, the Reformation and the Marxist labor movement. Both had their roots in Germany, and this tells us something about the potential of this country. The fact that the Catholic Church's showdown with the Reformers at the Council of Trent, from 1548 to 1563, and the capitalists' showdown with Marxism by creating Nazism, also happened in this country, shows that the Germans not only deliver the thinkers who inspire rebellion, but also those who are unable to shut this rebellion down again. The German ideology is powerful, no matter which way it moves, and my aversion against Germany has nothing to do with this ideology. Contrary, it has to do with the absence of this ideology. The Germany we know today is a crippled, unworthy and sick nation whose citizens do not have the freedom to think and speak, and whose view of itself is based on inferior complexes and lack of knowledge. The Germans do not know their own past, because they are not allowed to know it. They know they lost a war, but what this war was about and what the consequence of the defeat was about, they don't know. Germany today is a rich nation, but only in an economical way. Spiritual and intellectually it is a nation of poverty. Germany is a Jewish colony, when it comes to ideas and intellectual life, and the 200,000 American soldiers still being on German soil is the force to secure this power structure. In Germany, real production of knowledge of history and philosophy is prohibited. The Germans are not allowed to know their own past, and the fear of learning is so heavy, that even using the internet to seek real information, is prohibited. To know too much and to seek information the wrong places, will send you to jail. Obedience to the rulers is the dominant ideology, being sponsored by the state, the television, and the whole ideological system of universities, schools and educational institutions. The dominant rulers are the same that controlled Germany before the First World War. Some of them are living in Germany and others in USA and Israel. Most of them are Jews, but the Germans are not allowed to know that. Therefore, it is forbidden to talk about Jews and even to mention the word. Anyone trying to oppose this is immediately labeled an anti-Semite. That means he will lose his job and probably go to jail. Freedom of speech is not existing in Germany. The Germans don't really have much to be proud of. Nazism, repression, anti-communism, Russophobia, and lack of personal and intellectual freedom, that is the profile of the German nation. It is the winners of the war that writes the history, therefore German history is not written by Germans. At least not the Germans who feel in accordance with German tradition, because this tradition has been rejected. The Germans are looking for a new identity, and the Jewish American so-called democratic tradition of Hillary Clinton and President Obama, is close to the present German ideal. The present German culture and identity I will characterize as being sick, but by this I don't mean that individual Germans qualifies for a psychiatric diagnosis. The German disease cannot be cured through psychological therapy or medication because it is rooted in the German culture itself. This culture is a culture of losers that are ashamed of themselves, and it is so weak that it cannot bear to hear the utterances of any critics. Any encounter with the truth triggers panic attacks and uncontrolled anger in Germany, and these indications are recognized in general psychology to be sufficient for a patient to be declared mentally sick. For when one's personality is so fragile that a single word, for example gas chambers, can cause it to collapse, then there is something wrong. If Germany was a single person, one would recommend this person to go to the doctor and get some medication or maybe psychotherapy, but when it comes to an entire nation, the disease is more difficult to cure. What makes cure even more impossible is the fact that most of the Germans don't really see themselves as being sick. When a disease has become the norm, then no one sees it, in the same way as a fish cannot see the very water it swims in. Only when the German meet people from other countries, rooted in a different cultural context, they can see that they are missing something. They are different, they don't know their own story and they don't want to talk about it. They prefer to lie. When you travel, you see Germans isolate themselves amongst other Germans. They do not want to experience close contact with others, because they are afraid. They know that it can be dangerous to talk to other people, and they know that other people have a negative view of them. Therefore, they protect themselves. But unfortunately, isolation is not the way to get healed, because healing requires social and intellectual freedom, and that is exactly what the German rulers don't want the Germans to have. It is more easy to control people living in the dark, and when you have been living in the dark for a long time, you don't even want to see the light. It makes you afraid. Let's look a little closer at the German pathology. The German self-image is characterized by feelings of guilt and of denial. The Germans believe, or pretend to believe, that their parents and grandparents have exterminated 6 million Jews in gas chambers. Not their own grandparents but the grandparents of their neighbors. The remembrance of anything else that the Great War has to do with is disappearing, but the faith of the Holocaust is as strong as ever, despite the fact that the concept was firstly known by ordinary Germans in connection with the launch of a Hollywood television series called Holocaust in 1978. The Germans' understanding of their own history is a product coming from Hollywood. The productions of Steven Spielberg and other Holocaust movie makers has been shown again and again on German television. Hitler produced in his 12 years of power 3 anti-Jewish films, but the American movie industry has produced no less than 200 movies and documentaries, which serves the purpose of degrading the German culture. Germany is seen as a nation of anti-Semites and mass murderers. And the Hollywood films have greatly helped to create the German self-image, and thus the modern German identity. The Germans are trying to forget the period of their history that they are ashamed of, but they can't forget, because you can only forget something evil if you understand it. That is the basic truth of psychotherapy, and the Germans is not allowed to have any psychotherapy. They are not even allowed to discuss their own past, and without discussion, no therapy. Don't ask difficult questions in Germany. You know the answer in advance. I know nothing and I will not talk about it. And don't ask again, because if you do, you are anti-Semitic. One of the most popular buzzwords in modern Jewish Germany. The Germans know that they killed 6 million Jews. Every German can tell that his ancestors had no part in this crime, but no one will deny that it took place. It was all done by someone else. The 6 million is the big moral problem for the Germans. The fact that at the same time, 48 million Catholics, Orthodox, Muslims, Gypsies, Africans and Hindus were slaughtered has no interest. Because in modern Germany there are people who are worth more than others. It's not called racism, but respect for the Jews. The only difference between the old and the new German racism is the victims. The people who was the opponents of Hitler are now the ones who no one dares to speak against. They are the people who the Germans build museums and memorials for, and they are the people that the Germans pay retribution to. And the Germans pay a lot of money to these people. This is despite the fact that these people, the Israelis, not yet has paid anything in compensation to the Palestinians they drove out when they formed their own state. But there is a crucial moral difference between Jews and Palestinians. Any citizen of Israel, and in Germany, of course knows this. Jews are the rulers of the world. They are the people that is not called to follow moral rules or international laws. They can do what they want, because they are exceptionalists. And they have USA as their best friend. What is true for the German understanding is not a question of facts or logic, but of what was decided at the Nuremberg trials combined with the findings of the last Steven Spielberg movie. The Germans don't know the difference between American movies and scientific history. They are not allowed to see any difference, and scientific historical science is not produced by German writers. Holocaust is a unique event, and most Germans are proud to live in a nation that has exercised such a gigantic crime. Not because they believe that the crime was legitimate, but because they believe that the size of the crime provides a special honor to those who have confessed to have committed it. And they are all dead. The Germans believe they have purified their souls. They have said they are sorry, they pay the bill, and therefore they are not ashamed to make a lot of money out of protecting the mythology of the Holocaust, as millions of tourists from Israel and USA know it from the movies. Let's talk about shame and megalomania. Mental illness is associated with shame. This shame is on the one hand one of the reasons of the disease, and on the other hand, it is the expression of the disease. There is a kind of functional reciprocity between content and symptom in the German disease. On the one hand, one is ashamed over one's own past, but on the other, one regards itself as innocent, as the events in the last war must be understood as a result of the humiliation in the First World War being fought from 1914 to 1918. But the Germans also feel a sense of grandiosity. Inferiority complexes and grandiosity are two sides of the German psychological profile. They don't want to talk about their past, but they like when foreigners seems to be impressed. Although people in England and America do not look favorably on Nazism, then it is fully legal in both of these countries to support Nazism. It is fully legal, even though other people consider such people to be crazy. But such is not the case in Germany, where such individuals are imprisoned. The German self-image is in fact so fragile that it cannot tolerate being reminded of its own roots, because one knows that one has not done away with these roots. The German identity is so fragile, because it rests on suppression. Everyone knows that you cannot effectively remove an ideology or prevent people from asking questions, just by putting them to prison, and that is exactly what they do in Germany. Therefore, the German narrative is never critically discussed. It is simply forbidden. All German knows the story of Galileo and the medieval persecution of witches, so they know that both the church and the public could be mistaken. But Germans don't like discontent, and they believe that the best way to make everybody happy, is simply to make laws against feeling any other way. As other mentally ill and frail people, they do not tolerate contradiction. It takes only one remark labeling politically incorrect material for a rage to break loose, and the one who has said too much is forced from his job and excluded from the social community. If you even express the forbidden words, Holocaust, Jew, 6 million, lie, gas chamber or denial, then you lose your job and probably go to jail. Thinking in Germany is only possible if one is fully capable of keeping the outcome of these thoughts private. The slightest wind can get the house of cards to collapse, and the Germans want first and foremost peace and prosperity. They don't want the truth, because they know it is dangerous. If the Germans really believed in the mythology that they are presented to in the press, then it would not be necessary to prohibit people to contradict this story. But they don't believe the story, they know it's a lie, but they don't dare to say anything against it. To tell the truth in Germany, is to go to jail. Ask Germer Rudolph, David Irving, Gerhard Forster, Günter Deckert, Gerd Hansig, or Richard Williamson. They are all called Holocaust liars, and their books and videos are forbidden. They are not allowed to make public speeches. If they do, they will go to jail. Because this is the way the Germans protect themselves from being confronted with their own history. They prefer to live with a lie from the alternative, to feel the pain of the truth. Most Germans believe that the earth is round, but still the German rulers has not prohibited people from claiming that it is flat. Anyone who believes this is allowed to express himself, and no one cares. But the same is not the case, when the debate is about gas chambers or about the sacred 6 million number. A single sentence that reveals a citizen is in doubt, is enough to bring him into trouble. When the Germans in 2009 started their case against the British Bishop Richard Williamson, it was because he had given an interview to a Swedish television channel, where he had expressed doubts about the sacred truths, and for Germans nothing is more sacred than the number of victims in a Polish concentration camp. The Germans are proud, they did not kill 2 or 4 million Jews, they killed 6 million. Don't you dare to question this number. Nowhere in the world you will find people with a more fanatical desire to demonstrate their anti-fascist character than in Germany. This is the core of the delusional ideology made up by Angela Märkel and her government and supported by the Obama administration in USA. The autonomous youth movement in Copenhagen and Berlin tries to use this ideology as their basis when they attack persons and demonstrations supporting any other perception of the modern world than the one made up in Israel. These young people use the same logo, the skull, as SS did when Hitler was in power, and this is obviously fully legal in Germany. To be a Nazi is no problem, as long you remember to support Angela Märkel and call yourself an anti-fascist. And this is possible because these young people don't know anything about the German past. They have not learned anything in schools, and from television they only know the Spielberg version. For a reason, they are supported from Israel, the most criminal state in this world, but also the state that no one dares to go against. And Israel is a friend of Germany. The Jews in Palestine were supported by Hitler from 1933 to 39. Eichmann spoke Yiddish and he traveled again and again from Germany to Palestine to coordinate the exodus of the German Jews, that the settlers in Palestine wanted to use as the core of citizens in the coming Israel. Hitler was a Zionist, that's what he told himself and that's what the history shows. But the war changed everything. Hitler wanted the Jews out of Germany, and now he could not send them to Palestine. What should he do? He sent them to concentration camps and hoped to be able to send them to Palestine when the war was over. That did not happen. Once the Jews were put in German concentration camps, now they like to see that Germany is transformed to one big concentration camp. That makes everything so much more easy to control. Any kind of historical knowledge is, potentially, a threat to the Germans, who prefer to live with their illness in silence, rather than have it diagnosed and brought to the light. The price of the German economic success in the post-war times has been an intellectual stagnation. Germans prefer to live in the kind of innocence that comes from ignorance, therefore they don't want to know anything. Germans prefer to live in the darkness. Democracy and freedom of speech has probably never existed in Germany, so it's only a few people who are looking for this. The German sickness can therefore not be cured, because of the fact that therapy demands openness, debate, and exchange of opinions, and the Germans don't want that. They prefer the disease to the cure. They don't want to take the medicine. They just don't like freedom. Thank you for listening.